3, 2, 1.
Very glad to be in Los Angeles right now as an art maker, as an artist.
Shaun, from your point of view, you've had a lot written about you, and Kit's written a lot about you. Do you see yourself in this book? Does it feel like, you? It's hard when you stand back and somebody's speaking about you. You need to feel connected to the persona that has been created on the page, no?
Yeah, that's a complex question. I'm not sure if I can really mount a clear answer, because it's a big one. I think, definitely I can see where Kit's research drew upon specific interviews. For sure. I can when I read the book, I could sort of see, that material came from that moment. One was a great moment where we were in Hyde Park, Green Park, Hyde Park.
Yes, Hyde Park, in London.
And we started the interview and we kept going, and the sun faded, and it was in winter, so that happened pretty quickly in London. And we were still talking with each other in darkness. And but I remember the material from that interview clearly, and so those kind of moments I think stayed with me, and I was catching them in the book, but also because Kit has his own theoretical framework, and he was also researching my work in relation to visual culture connected to these wars in general.
I know, that's what's the interest of the book is, really, I think.
Yeah, so it's really his research, and I just happen to feature in parts of it.
I think you featured in more than parts. But now that you've moved us towards the sort of meta story behind the book or above the book, it's really about photography and war, isn't it, Kit? I mean, it's about how wars have changed, how wars are conveyed to us, the viewers who are not there, and what sort of role the technical side plays in that process. Kit, go through, I remember something that struck me in the book very forcefully. When wars were fought, and you went through, and it's the first time I've thought of it, Australia in the First World War, which we're celebrating or memorialising now with Anzac Day, the Vietnam War, the Second World War, the Vietnam War, and now Iraq and Afghanistan. Describe to the audience in a way that you did in the book, which I found very insightful, how people received the images of war before as opposed to now.
Okay. One of the things that I trace the history of, particularly the still and then the moving image, first looking at photographers like Alexander Gardner, who was documenting the American Civil War, through to then the early Pathé and Gaumont reels that were being produced during the First World War. And I was thinking about how when someone like Gardner was taking pictures of the battlefields on in the American Civil War, how the film speed was so slow that there really wasn't any action. So you had lots of dead bodies, obviously, but also cannonballs and that kind of thing. When Pathé started to produce their moving images, the equipment that they had was like these 25-kilogram massive cameras. There was a supply chain that was a physical supply chain that meant that the film had to be developed. That film then had to be copied, transported. So the supply chain really between the filming and this appearing on screens throughout Europe was really about 5 or 6 weeks. Now, the Vietnam War, people always say that the Vietnam War was the first televised war, and one of the images that I talk about in there was the summary execution by Colonel Lone, which was it made the front page of the New York Times, and it was, I think, also filmed by CBS at the time. Had a massive impact on American politics back in 1968. But the really fascinating thing, however, and this is why I think having Shaun as an official war artist, and again, I think the AWM in choosing him was an incredibly bold move, but an incredibly wise one, I think, was that we now live in a time where those images of the battlefield can be taken, yeah. I mean, I can take a picture of you guys. There you go. And then I can post that up on, Facebook or something like that. And immediately it's that distribution chain that used to take weeks is now down to seconds, and it's infinitely digitally reproducible. Mm-hmm. Now, this thing can record, probably about 24 hours worth of video, thousands of still images. That changes, that fundamental paradigm shift, I think, changes how images are produced. And the war that we're talking about, which, the one that's been dubbed as the War on Terror, and it's no longer called that, really was the war that instantaneous supply chain and that degree of distribution really played a significant part. So when Shaun went into that particular theatre of war to make work, those resonances, I think, are automatically there. Yeah.
I think that's very interesting. You wouldn't really be thinking of 6 weeks down to 6 seconds or 2 seconds, but that's the reality. Shaun, when you were commissioned by the War Memorial, what sort of advice did they give you? What did they require from you? What did they... were there parameters? Was there a framework? That doesn't come out in the book, so I'm genuinely asking this.
Yeah, it's probably more of a technical issue with contracts, but there was like a kind of mandate. There was like a sort of charter, in a sense, that, and I think, and actually one of the War Memorial curators is here. He could answer this better than I could. But my understanding was that
we'll ask him afterwards.
Yeah, there was because I forget. I didn't do my homework. I knew that I had to. I remember that there was a clause in it that said that you're really asked to record life in all forms in that theatre of war. That the Australian troops and other members that they're working with in ISAF, that I was really there to kind of record my personal vision or understanding of what was taking place.
And how did you come to that then, given that you perhaps didn't do your homework, dot your I's and cross your T's?
Yeah.
There you were, arriving in Afghanistan, say, and there was the camp and the soldiers, and then?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had to take a pretty critical stance on it, because I sort of saw the contract, but then I thought, okay, I really have to question, firstly, why I'm here, because I'm not a photojournalist. No. I mean, I'm okay with the camera, but I soon realised that a lot of the soldiers that I was meeting were actually better at using technology than I was. And so, I mean, because this warfare and technology are really going hand in hand, always has, but now when you're dealing with digital photography, I was seeing their aptitude towards the technology as being something that I should really use. Or rather, I should be handing my cameras to them and letting them use it, and I would be more of a director. So I think maybe my observations of what was taking place instantly started to give me ideas and really form the nature of the work that I did over there.
So it was sort of as you went along. Yeah. And taking the images, I don't know how many of you have seen it, but the soldiers, one of whom has got a blonde plait, so obviously a woman from the back, all of them are shown at UNSW Art and Design. Was that a security? This is a genuine question as well. Was that a security issue, or was that an artistic decision?
It was a bit of both, actually.
A bit of both.
Yeah, because obviously some personnel over there, their identities are protected because they're working in a field where they really can't have themselves shown.
No.
And but also for me, I was interested in maybe working around different ideas of portraiture. That say, and Kit does mention this in the book, that maybe for me to have, like, say, profile or frontal portrait, that's something that has been done before very well, and I'm not sure if I could add to that conversation around portraiture. So I have this interest in and this has happened for a while, well before I got to Afghanistan, of looking at how people observe space, and that maybe there could be a double looking, a kind of looking at them looking. And it comes from references, of course, a very famous one is Caspar David Friedrich's Wander Above the Sea of Fog from 1818. And a lot of artists, I'm not the only one chasing that reference. It's a very popular sort of artwork, because it's the first time I noticed, even as a student, that I was looking at someone looking. And so really that was kind of the thinking behind that series.
Well, if you look at the book, Double War, that is the title. So, Kit, how did you come to that title? It's called Double War, Shaun Gladwell, Visual Culture and the Wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Here's the book itself.
It seemed, I remember at the time, and the title actually seemed to appear fairly early. I remember the time, not the full title, but the Double War part. That seemed almost to be the most obvious title, because if any of you guys are familiar with Shaun's work, doubling appears through a lot of Shaun's work. Not only the fact that there's two screens, split screens in a lot of his work, but also that, for instance, if you've been to the UNSW Art and Design Gallery and you've seen those three images of Shaun and his brother sitting with the USS Enterprise on the table there, that Shaun's brother actually appears in a few of his works that you may not know really, but there's some. If you spend enough time looking at these images, there's some visual cues you can actually tell. This is Shaun, this is his brother. So the doubling seemed to be a very natural thing that occurs in Shaun's work. Also, Shaun had an exhibition which was at the Australian Centre for Moving Images in Melbourne, which was called Stereo Sequences, and that was, as the title suggests, that was by and large these double-screened works filmed in various situations. So it tied in very well, I think, with the idea of Iraq and Afghanistan being these double wars that made up the war on terror.
So this is the doubling of the two wars.
And in fact,
that's double as in two.
If you flick over to the back, see, this is actually the recording of the double field work that is, in fact, it's...
The best way is to mount the book on the wall. It's not work.
You've done that before.
That's right. That's right.
And that's in the show,
that's in the show,
it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
But so read it first.
Doubling is a huge theme. Dr. Barbara Poller and Professor Paul Arden, Shaun and I had lunch together today, and we were talking about, for the show, bringing in, not the show here, but the show at UNSW, Art and Design, bringing in, two outside people from France, one from Switzerland, and to what extent that in fact added to our understanding of Shaun's work. Here are two people from Europe, far away, looking at it. At the one level, you can read their essays, and Patricia and I had a talk about that too some time ago, and thinking, well, what have they really added to the conversation? What, if anything? Because Shaun's work has been discussed and dissected, and everybody has peered at it and, deconstructed it and so on. And what Shaun and I decided, at least I decided, and I think he nodded, was that, even if... Barbara, for me, came up with two ideas, and I want Shaun to comment publicly. One is an idea that had been mentioned before, and that is the romantic element in Shaun's work. Romantic as in the romantic movement, the sublime, and Kit refers to that as well, awe and terror and fear, that sort of thing. And the other thing is the doubling. Now, Shaun, to what extent do you feel that, we discussed this, but I'd like you to share this with the audience, that having two outside curators in a way enhanced the conversation? You said you couldn't add to the portraiture conversation at some level, because so many people have done such good portraits. And here's Pat, who's just joined the portrait gallery, and we know how important portraits are. But you can't keep presenting people frontally, gazing at the camera, or being painted like this forever. It just becomes boring. And so how do you get around that? So the first question is, what did the outsiders add?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's
anything.
Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like at one point as an art student, you really have to, you're asked to think about your work. You're asked to develop a kind of understanding of your themes, and then there's this concept of an exegesis that you have to write about your work, and so there's a structure there. But then there's something sort of exciting and terrifying in equal measure when you're asking someone else to do that for you. And for me, it was Kit who did that for the first time, actually in that art space essay. That was an extended essay, which for me was a thrill, because I get another mind thinking about my work and really giving it attention. Not just a small paragraph, to introduce a work, but it becomes a major element of the show. And so for Barbara and Paul, I think maybe because they have a Western European sensibility or their own understanding gets projected onto the work. That was a great thrill.
And what did they add, Shaun?
I think maybe because Barbara, because of her particular understanding of romanticism, they've already moved through that, and she's in Switzerland where major players within that kind of movement were living.
Rousseau went,
Of course.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Even to the point where she's literally living in the Alps, which is such a major sort of subject matter for German and Swiss romanticism. I think she was living with the stuff that I was referring to, and that alone would give her a different
That's
perspective.
a wonderful way of putting it, in a way. And Paul?
I think because Paul, he's always interested in sort of subcultural activity, but he has a European understanding where he would also, in a way, maybe look at my work in a filmic way, or he has a distanced understanding of it through film, but that's also my references as well. So we meet through the love of different mediums. But also it's kind of, there's something terrifying as an artist reading work that's extended about your work, because it's this debate about the artist's intention versus everyone else's interpretation. And so for me, even to talk about my work now, I'm up here with Kit, and he's become like a world authority on my work. I'm like, jeepers, like I better get it right, because
obviously there you go.
Yeah. And so it's also, and I guess with the Lacrima Chair project, Barbara and Paul become experts. They just have their own understanding of that work, and it was a thrill to know that many times those understandings connected to my intention.
I don't know how many people here have had an academic background, but there was always the discussion in academic circles about authorial will and then public reception. So what does the author want? What is the author, being the writer or the artist? And then what does the public, what do the viewers bring to it? And of course they're not always the same. The author might want X and the public overall sees Y, and you can't control that. So you do have to, it's like a baby who grows into a teenager, into an adult. You let that baby go into the world, and then you like all our children, you're not responsible anymore. In a certain way you are, because you're there at the beginning, but in another way they behave, they take on their own persona in the world, and this is the same with an artwork. I want to bring back the discussion for a moment to the in-between spaces and the quiet moments that Kit refers to in the book. You can go into, both Kit and Shaun have mentioned the theatre of war. Now, I don't know what theatre means to you, but to me it means something dramatic, something staged, something probably kind of intense for 2 hours, and then you go home to your quiet meal afterwards or whatever. It is a kind of theatre, isn't it, in a funny kind of way, from a particular perspective. But Shaun doesn't, and Kit is very clear about this, and I think everybody agrees. Carolyn Christoph Bakardjev, who's one of the great critics and curators, I think, of our day, that Shaun is not about the kind of dramatic, explosive moments, and war allows a lot of those moments. I mean, in a way, the bombing, the Hiroshima, the mushroom, the victims. So talk a little bit about how you approached war, and then we'll ask Kit his opinion on that, Shaun. Those sort of quieter spaces that you captured somehow, not the high drama people, one person like that New York Times image, where a gun is at somebody's head,
I think in a way, like I'd already been. Whoa! I just lost my microphone. It was dramatic. I was always
not as traumatic as war.
No, that's right.
No.
I think because I was interested in, say, how athletes were moving, or the things that I was involved in, like skateboarding or surfing or whatever, I would see that stuff projected or, through TV in that dramatic way. And also I was, like every other kid, I saw so many war-based Hollywood films, and I saw the explosions and the high drama. But for me, already before I get to the Afghanistan experience, I'm already trying to work out these other moments that for me are very important. What happens, say, 5 minutes before the Olympic athlete gets onto the track? How do they psych themselves up to that moment? And what are the things that we don't get to see through sports broadcasting? And those moments of preparation when someone finds themselves having to reach in and make an extraordinary effort, how do you represent that? That was a problem that I had as an art student. And I took those concerns into the Afghanistan experience. I was interested in rehearsals or moments where people are knowing that they're going into great danger, but they have to find some space, or they're involved in a meditation and a kind of search. And that became a problem for me because I wasn't sure how to represent that at all.
Well, you did it very well, and I think these soldiers with their backs to the camera, and, they had all these uniforms on that didn't look very strict to me. They looked messy.
Yeah.
You think you'd all have to be in the same, and everyone was in a muddle. One had a plait and the other had a hat, and somebody had personal badges.
Yeah.
Is that allowed?
Actually, I guess a lot of the rules, because we're talking about the military, so it's full of rules and regulations. A lot of that had changed since, say the Second World War, and maybe in Vietnam and beyond. There was this kind of customization of stuff, and for me that's fascinating because I'm interested in subcultures. So for me, I just launched straight into what does all of that mean?
Yes. And what are these badges? What are they saying?
The language around the badges was fascinating for me because it is like another language. But also, I think I was shocked when I met members from the special forces in Australia, the guys who are really, and the women also who are in bases and serving at the front line. But more so the special forces units, they didn't have this kind of clean-shaven GI look that came from the Second World War. What they would do is they would be allowed to grow beards. They're in a Muslim country. Males wear beards out of respect, and they would meet those expectations of what a man would look like. Instead of walking through a village and offending everyone by being clean shaven. And so there was a reason for a lot of a practical reason.
Practical reason to blend in a little, not to sort of confront people before you've even started.
I mean, in one sense it's a form of camouflage, but in another sense it's almost like being sympathetic to the cultural practices. But for me, I mean, I walk into a military base and I see all of these bush rangers. That's how I read it. These guys with full beards who looked very fit and menacing. I was like, wow, I've arrived in this very, so yeah, I had a different reading.
Are these friends or enemy? You might have said.
Yeah, they were very friendly to me when I said hi, but to look at them, that was definitely that imposing look.
And Kit, how do you see the personal camera in war? The fact that we can go in, we all know those images from the American side, the detention centres and so on. Brian and I saw a program on TV the other night where the police are accused of overreacting to an African American who has, either behaved badly or not. It's difficult to judge. And the response to that, which I think is very sensible, is to put body cameras on them so that nobody can argue afterwards. Was it excessive? Was it racist? Or was it necessary in order to protect themselves? So this is a very new phenomenon, isn't it, Kit?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this recently because I've just come back from LA where I've been doing some research with an artist over there. And a lot of her work is about disasters. And she was talking to me about the LA riots. And I was thinking about the LA riots, which I think was 1992. And how that was sparked off by the video of the Rodney King beating, which just happened to be... Someone was there with a video camera recording that at the time. That may not have... the whole event may not have happened if somebody hadn't have been there recording it. But also, I suppose there's a certain speed that that event unfolded at. It was a televised disaster.
I remember it. The police beating him as he was down. Yes.
And, the interesting thing, and I think the problematic thing, and this is one of in the first chapter of the book that I talk about, is that images are volatile. They're fugitive. They're incredibly powerful, but it's also for that reason that they can also be manipulated. That a video is never a neutral thing. A video is always a vessel for ideology.
Yes. And
Susan Sontag argues essentially it is the discourse that goes around. She talks specifically about the text, but it's the discourse that surrounds an image that will determine essentially what its affect is. Because when we're dealing with photography particularly, photographic, still are moving images, we're dealing with issues to do with affect and emotion. And that is something to someone like Roland Barthes, Sontag's generation, was something that meant photography had to be dealt with a great deal of suspicion. You really, really couldn't trust photography. There's been, it's referred to as the affective turn in the last 10 or 15... Turn. T-U-R-N. And the affective turn essentially is a point at which academics, and we've had some very significant academics here. Jill Bennett, just a co-author, has written about this. Where that affective, emotional power that an image has is something that is now really closely considered as being part of, it is acknowledged as being kind of fugitive and as being volatile, but that means that we can't just then dismiss images. Look how
it's also suspect.
Powerful they are. Yeah, absolutely.
It's suspect.
Absolutely.
Do we know whether to believe it? And particularly, Shaun, in this day where you can adjust images, do people believe what they see?
I think it's a case-to-case basis. So especially over there in say in Afghanistan, I was very aware that I was photographing, but I was also being photographed. I was recording, but I was being recorded by drones overhead that could read my watch. But I thought I was isolated with a group of people in the desert, but we were seriously monitored. But of course, that's a strange feeling. So of course, I was treading with suspicion about what was being seen, that this space was incredibly visible to agents that I didn't know where or
what their agendas were.
And that kind of inspired a lot of the projects that I did. You know, I mean, everything from asking soldiers to record themselves and then near a drone capture site where the drones would come to, maybe me observing soldiers who didn't know that they were being photographed. A series of works was when I was taking photos of soldiers whilst they were asleep, and I would let them wake up, and then I'd go over to them and let them know that I'd photographed them, and they'd say, "That is a terrible photo. You're looking straight up my nostril cavities. Forget about it." Or and then I would start to employ tricks like saying, "Oh, look at this great photo I took of you." So I'd already loaded up the terrible tricks.
It's photojournalistic.
Tricks of a photojournalist. You know, I started to learn through these other people I was spending time with. But that idea that they didn't know when I was taking photographs, I didn't know when I was being recorded. So the whole space was suspicious in that sense.
Yeah, it was under scrutiny.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got just 2 or 3 more questions because I want the audience to be involved as well. You and Kit have had plenty of time to converse, and I with you as well. I wanted you to talk, Shaun, a little bit about previous people who've gone into war zones, both in Australia, and also people like Basquiat and Steve McQueen and even Edward Muybridge, the romantic painters I think you've referred to. Everybody stands on the shoulders of someone else. There's nobody who Einstein came up with a new idea, and I suppose Galileo and various other people, one can say, came up with something completely new that nobody had thought of. But most people build on something. So what was in your past? What do you think led you to this moment?
Yeah, I think just that it wouldn't just be necessarily art historical influences.
No.
Like say I'm interested in pretty much all of the names that you've just mentioned, actually, because they're a part of a canon, including like other people like Don McCullin, who was an incredible. We have this kind of magnum photography that takes place in war, and then there was the painters, of course. But I think also I can't deny the power of Hollywood, even if I'm trying to kick against that aesthetic. That becomes an influence or coordinate.
A counter-influence in a way.
Yeah. And then there's also the other influences, like the power that my father's snapshots in Vietnam had on me. And my dad is here tonight, actually. Hi, Dad.
Partly.
Yeah. I think because when I was a child, I would look through this biscuit tin of these photographs, and later my father explained to me that was the first time he'd been outside of Australia, and he's in a war zone, and witnessing atrocity and being in that environment, which would be extremely, I can't even imagine.
No.
But then also having for the first time your own camera, like a box brownie, and then the schizophrenic logic of being a tourist in an exotic land when there isn't that heightened sort of the drama that we were talking about. You were talking about boredom or downtime before, but then you kind of think, well, also maybe the psychology shifts from the soldier to the tourist, and how is that recorded? And I saw some photos of my father's where the war had been framed out, and there were village scenes and life taking place in southern Afghanistan, and they were extremely powerful. So I think they're obviously big influences.
There's so many influences, sometimes you can't separate them really.